So Hebrews chapter 11 is where we're at. And tonight I'm going to do just one verse, doing a bit of Matthew. And it's verse 4. So Hebrews 11 verse 4. So I'll just read that out. By faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, a God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. So thus begins a kind of sort of roll call of faith. Each sort of verse, well, almost each verse starts with the words by faith, by faith, by faith. And you could, I suppose, put these different personalities into one of three categories, loosely speaking. So it could be by the faith by which they were made acceptable to God, the faith by which they overcame through God, or the faith by which they are saved by God. And the first thing to notice about it is they're all Old Testament saints, which is really interesting. And what that does is show that even though we're speaking about before Jesus was born, before the cross, before the resurrection, that even for those who believed on the living God, that it was still by and through faith that they were made right with God. And I say that because there is a teaching out there that says that Gentiles are made right by faith in Christ, but the Jews are made right through obeying the law. And that's not what this is saying. Thanks. That's not what this is saying. This is saying that actually it was always by faith. From the earliest days, from the earliest kind of beginning, it was faith. And the one we're going to look at tonight, Abel, of course, very early on in the Bible, very early on in Genesis. And how can it be by faith when it's before Christ was even born, or before the crucifixion, or before the resurrection, before his ascension? Because, as Matthew was saying the other week, the effect of the cross is retroactive, as well as, so those that come after Christ's crucifixion by faith in his blood are saved and made righteous before God. But it's also those who, as it were, saw Christ afar off, who believed on the Lord, are also made righteous. And that's really what this is saying. And so we're going to kick it off tonight with the first of these Old Testament saints, and that is this person Abel. And I guess this would put, as we read this verse, it would put Abel in the first category that I mentioned, those who are made acceptable to God by or through faith. So let's have a look at it in Genesis chapter 4. Genesis 4, and we'll read the first 5 verses. And Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord, and Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect, and Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. So interesting, isn't it? We've got two brothers who bring a sacrifice or an offering before God, and one is accepted and the other is not. And the one who is refused, who's not accepted, shows displeasure, doesn't he? His countenance, that is the look on his face, falls, and he is wroth. He's very angry about it. And there are some striking similarities here between the two of them, but yet also, of course, this one notable difference. So the similarities are both are brothers, both have the same parents. Sometimes, in the Old Testament they've got a different mother or something, but no, in this case both have the same mother and father, both therefore from the same ethnic group, both bring a sacrifice from their own work. Remember, one's a tiller of the ground, I guess like a farmer, gardener. The other is a shepherd or a keeper of sheep, livestock, and both offer that sacrifice to God. The difference being, of course, one is accepted and one is rejected. So inevitably...
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I don't want to...
Well, go on.
Well, why wasn't Cain's offering acceptable?
The very question we're going to consider. Yes. So the question is, why was Abel's offering acceptable and why was Cain's offering not acceptable? Now, some have said that it is because Abel offered a lamb, the firstling of his flock, and therefore because he shed blood, in the scriptures there's that picture throughout Leviticus and various other places where animals are killed, and this is a figure or a type of Christ, and therefore Abel is accepted because he sheds blood. Cain is not, because he doesn't shed any blood. Now, whilst I accept that is figuratively a picture, I think that is a very important picture. Yes, that it's talking of Christ, but I don't fully accept that. I do have some problems with it, because the fact that he brought the fruit of the ground, elsewhere in the Old Testament law, there are things like grain offerings, there is first fruits. So there were occasions on which people brought the produce of the land and offered it to God, and it was accepted by God. So whilst I think, yes, it is a picture of Christ, it is a picture of the sacrifice and of a blood offering and a blood atonement, that's not the full story, and that's not really what Hebrews is focusing on the most here. And so there are a number of clues, although the details are sort of sparse here, and although we've only got the one verse in Hebrews about them, and we've got 5 or more verses in Genesis 4, nevertheless I think the clues as to why one is accepted, the other is rejected, are there. And what are those clues? Well, what does the Bible tell us about Cain and his offering? So Abel offers the first of his flock and the fat thereof. Quite often in the Bible, when it talks about fat, it doesn't have the negative connotations that we would perhaps put on it. It means the best, Where is it? Isaiah, just came to me, Isaiah 55. You'll get an idea of it from this. So Isaiah 55 verse 2 says, "Wherefore do ye spend money for that which is not bread, and your labour for that which satisfieth not? Hearken diligently unto me, and eat ye that which is good, and let your soul delight itself in fatness." So it's That's a great phrase, isn't it? But it is, you know, the fat portion, if you like, of the animal, which is the best. So what we have with Abel, with his sacrifice, what makes it significant, I think, is the fact that he offers the best. And we get this picture as well, don't we, throughout the Old Testament and Leviticus and so on, where they're told, you know, don't bring animals that are lame, don't bring animals that are sickly, you know, you're to bring the best to the Lord. And I think, you know, in Genesis 4, we're told just that Cain brings, the offering. He just brings it from the ground. He brings some of his crops and he gives it to God. But we're not told they're the first fruits or anything like that. Whereas we're given details about Abel's offering, that it's the best. He appreciates the need, perhaps, for that sacrifice. And later on, we see that there's a problem, perhaps not just with the offering that Cain brings, but with Cain himself. That there's something about Cain's heart that he is not right with God. Neither is he right with his brother Abel either, and that becomes apparent. So let's just have a look at that, Genesis 4, and we'll look at verse 8 for a second. So this reveals what's in Cain's heart. Remember that when God rejected him, he was very angry about it. And verse 8 it says, Genesis 4 verse 8, and Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. So they're out together in the field, and Cain kills his brother Abel, the first murder recorded in the Bible. So, yes, there is something wrong with Cain's heart. It is clearly expressed here. And I think that Abel's sacrifice involving blood may well be a shadow of the atonement, yes, but I think more significantly it is a picture of faith. That one offering is offered, if you like, out of duty, therefore it's not the best, and it's just, you know, here you are, God, whereas the other is the best of his flock and is an example of Abel's faith in Christ. Now let me make that argument a little bit more robust by calling on some other scriptures that would support that. So the Apostle Paul says that the righteousness of God, which is by faith of Jesus Christ unto all and upon all them that believe, Romans 3:22. So it is that righteousness which is by faith. And sort of flipping back to Hebrews 11 verse 4, it said, by faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous. So it was by faith that we're made righteous. So therefore Abel's sacrifice must have been by faith. Well, Hebrews says it was, for him to be declared righteous. So his sacrifice is by faith, and therefore he is righteous before God. So this faith is not only a faith which makes a person acceptable to God, but it then enables the person to overcome through God. 1 John 3:10-12 talks about those who do righteousness, who are righteous. So it's not just, oh, I'm made righteous with God now, great, but also the one who has faith, it is present continuous. It continues throughout the life of that person. It's not a one-off thing, or you're acceptable with God now, but rather our life flows out of that faith. And again, this is all Old Testament, because the just shall live by faith, by his faith, is a quote from the Old Testament. I think it's from Joel, Habakkuk,
Joel.
something like that. Yeah. So these are all what we think of as really New Testament and really kind of post-Reformation and kind of Lutheran and all those kind of ideas. It's all New Testament stuff. Actually, no, it's there in the Old Testament. This idea of being right with God through faith, through believing on the Lord. And you read Psalm 51 as well, thou desirest truth in the inward parts. So actually even inside, in the heart. And that's where Cain's problem is, I believe. It's not just that he offered a shoddy sacrifice or offering. The problem lies in here, in his heart, that he is not right with God, he is not right with his brother, he hates his brother, and that is seen by the first murder committed and by the way in which God rejects him. Because if he had faith, here's a question: would he be accepted by God? Could it be that if he'd was right with God in his heart, that God might have accepted him even if he didn't offer an animal? Interesting thought, isn't it? So what we do, and of course what Abel did was sacrifice. So it's not just what we think or believe, but what we do is as important as our faith, if it comes from faith. As James says, I will show thee my faith by my works. There must be an outworking of this faith, of what I believe. There must be an expression of it in my life. So Abel's acceptance was more than a matter of faith or than a matter of produce, but are we saying that Cain could have been actually accepted by God? Well, we're going to look at a verse that I think answers that question. And again, it's back to Genesis, sort of flipping between Genesis and Hebrews tonight. Genesis 4, verse 7. And this is God speaking to Cain. Cain, of course, the one who has been rejected. And Genesis 4, we'll read from verse 6. And it says, And the Lord said unto Cain, why art thou wroth? In other words, why are you angry? And why is thy countenance fallen? And I think in William Tyndale's it says something like his face was lowry. I'm not sure how you say it, or lury, and it means stormy. So you can imagine a way this look of anger, it's like a storm on his face. And God asks the question, why so angry? Why wroth? Why is your countenance fallen? Then listen to what he says in verse 7. If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? Stop there for a minute. So it seems that the reason that Cain is rejected is because he didn't do well, because he didn't do the right thing. And if he had done the right thing, he would have been accepted. Now that brings up all sorts of theological questions, which we won't go into now, but it's perhaps worth thinking about. So he could have been accepted, God is saying, but you didn't do it right. What didn't he do right? He didn't offer it in faith. Otherwise, he would have been made righteous. So he brought a sacrifice, he brought an offering, but he didn't bring it in faith. It was just an outward expression. It was a duty of what he felt he needed to do with God, but there was no faith involved there. He hadn't dealt with the anger in his heart, hatred towards his brother, and so on. And so it goes on to say in verse 7, sin lieth at the door. That's what God says to him, and it's just a brilliant picture. I always imagine it in my mind. The sort of picture comes into my mind of a closed door with like like a sort of demon crouched behind it, just waiting to enter, and it's like, well, here's your choice. Either you're going to let sin enter in, or you're going to give that sacrifice, that offering, the very best to God. And as someone once said, the Christian life, salvation itself is almost like a paradox. It's free. It's a free gift, and yet it will cost you everything that you have. The disciples left all to follow Jesus. And it's the same for us. We might not leave our house or our car or our job, but we are prepared to leave all just to follow Christ, whatever that all may be. So Genesis 4:7 teaches potentially Cain could have been as acceptable to God as Abel. Why did he fail? Because he did not respond to God in faith. And again, this is a theme it's picked up in the New Testament, but it's speaking of the Old Testament. Let's have a look at Jude. Right at the end there, Jude. And only one chapter in Jude. Or some might say no chapter. So it's Jude 1 verse 5. And Jude says, I will therefore put you in remembrance, though you once knew this, how that the Lord, having saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed them that believed not. So how about that? God saves the people out of Egypt. He saves the Israelites out of Egypt. Egypt being a picture of the world. And he brings them through the wilderness, and yet that whole generation, we read, die in the wilderness, right? And so that's why when Joshua comes to the Jordan, before they cross, they have to circumcise them, because there's a whole new generation of people who are going to cross into the promised land. And the reason we're told why they didn't enter was because they didn't believe, because they didn't have faith. And that's how important it is in the Old Testament. And it's confirmed for us, well, it had been confirmed for us earlier on in Hebrews chapter 3. I'm just sort of tying it in with our context here. Hebrews 3, 15, speaking about this very event, says, while it is said, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts, as in the provocation. For some, when they had heard, did provoke. Howbeit not all that came out of Egypt by Moses, but with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not with them that had sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness? Again, talking about those who are coming out of Egypt. And to whom sware he that they should not enter into his rest, but them that believed not? So we see they could not enter in because of unbelief. Then carrying on reading verse 4, let us therefore fear lest a promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. For unto us was the gospel preached, I love this bit, as well as unto them. So they had the gospel preached to them, did they? What, even though Jesus hadn't even been born? Yes, because it has always been by faith that men and women are made right with God. Even before Christ came, even before his crucifixion, it was that way. And that's why the writer says the gospel was preached as well unto them. But the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. So that's it. It's good. There was no faith there. Therefore, yes, it was of no profit to them. So just finishing off now in Hebrews 11 verse 4, the bit that we're looking at tonight. It's so perfect, this. I love the way this particular verse ends, where it says that he was righteous, because his offering, of course, we've established was by faith. God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. What does that mean? So it means that God is testifying. God is saying something because he accepted Abel's sacrifice. He's saying, Abel, I accept that sacrifice because figuratively, the sacrifice represents Christ on the cross, which ties in nicely with all the shadows, the foreshadows, the types, the figures of Christ that we've been looking at throughout this epistle, which has just been so much, hasn't it, of the epistle to the Hebrews, been all these different symbols and foreshadowing and antitypes and all that kind of stuff. So it would be certainly consistent in this context that the writer would be using this symbolism here. That yes, it's first of all God testifies that this is acceptable, that Abel is acceptable, but also Abel being dead still speaks. He still speaks to us today. And what is it that he's saying? That a sinner is only accepted through faith. And that's it. That's what he's saying. That is what the account is testifying to. It's testifying to Christ, the blood, the atonement, and it's testifying, look, if you want to be made right with God, it's not about bringing sacrifices, doing things by duty and outward appearance. It's by faith. You have faith in Christ, then you can be made righteous, just like Abel was with God.